The wind cut low across the dry earth, brushing against the barbed fence that lined the edge of the Whitmore property. Dust lifted in brief swirls and settled again like it was too tired to fight the heat. The sun, already high, bled its golden light across the Texas horizon. Everything was dry, silent, and rigid, just like the man who ruled the land. Judge Nathaniel Whitmore stood on the porch of his ranch house, arms crossed, surveying his domain with an expression carved from stone. He was a man of law, of pride, and of order. His cattle grazed in the north pasture. His hands worked in silence. And his daughter, Clara, was to be seen and not heard. Clara Whitmore had known the rules since she could remember. Her dresses were always clean. Her prayers always memorized. Her voice, when it rose too loud, was swiftly corrected. At 17, she was considered old enough to marry but far too young to speak with conviction. The walls of the house were painted with silence. Every step had its place. Every thought had its proper time. She would sneak moments of freedom in the barn, brushing down the horses or standing near the corral long after her chores were done. That's where she first began to notice him, Joshua Calder, the new ranch hand her father had hired late spring. He was a quiet man, older than her by a few years, with a soft way about him. He spoke in short sentences, smiled rarely, and worked harder than any of the others. But Clara saw the way his eyes softened when he looked at the animals. How his hands were rough from work, but gentle when coaxing a skittish foal. He seemed to carry a silence of his own, but not the kind her father carried. His wasn't cold, it was peace. The first time they spoke, it was only a few words. "You always brush that one?" he asked, nodding toward the chestnut mare. Clara had blinked, startled by the question. "She doesn't let anyone else close," she replied. Joshua tilted his head slightly, watching her with mild interest. "Horses trust what's calm," he said, then turned back to his work. After that, their conversations trickled in like rain during drought. A comment about the weather. A quiet laugh when a pig escaped the pen. Then came the day their hands brushed while reaching for the same halter. Clara had felt her pulse jump. Joshua had stepped back quickly, apologizing under his breath. But something had passed between them. By July, they had learned to find each other in the quiet. He would pass her an apple while she hung laundry. She would leave an extra biscuit wrapped in cloth near the haystack. At night, Clara lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the crickets, her heart full of warmth and confusion. It wasn't love in the storybook sense. There were no declarations or poetry. It was a slow-burning fire, the kind you don't notice until it's already warmed your bones. And one night, beneath the cover of a pale crescent moon, that fire burned too brightly to ignore. They met behind the smokehouse, hands clasped, eyes wide. Joshua's voice was rough when he spoke. "This ain't right, Clara," he whispered. "Your father, he'd hang me from the fence if he knew." "I don't care," she breathed, stepping closer. "No one's ever looked at me like I wasn't made of porcelain." The kiss was soft, hesitant at first, then urgent, then desperate. They met like that again, and again, hiding in stables, slipping behind tool sheds, finding pieces of themselves and one another they hadn't known were missing. But secrets don't stay buried on the frontier, not when a house is full of ears and a town is hungry for scandal. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Clara had been late to supper. Her cheeks were flushed, her hair tangled from the wind. Joshua had returned to the bunkhouse with straw on his back and a look that wasn't easy to read. The next morning, Judge Whitmore summoned them both to the parlor. Joshua stood like a man awaiting his sentence. Clara sat, pale and stiff, her fingers clenched in her skirt. Her father paced slowly in front of the fireplace, the ticking clock the only sound in the room. "You've shamed this house," the judge said, his voice low and trembling with fury. "My own daughter, behaving like a common whore under my roof." Clara flinched. Joshua spoke quickly. "Sir, "Silence," Whitmore's voice boomed. "You will not speak." He turned to Clara, his face a mask of control barely held together. "Is it true?" She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. "Is it true?" he barked. Clara nodded. Whitmore's hand moved so fast she didn't see it coming. The sound cracked louder than a rifle. Her cheek stung as she stumbled backward. Joshua lunged forward, instinctively reaching to shield her, but Whitmore drew a pistol from his belt. "One more step, and I'll send you to the Lord myself." Joshua froze. The judge pointed toward the door. "Get off my land. If I see your face again, I'll bury you in it." Joshua didn't speak. He turned, shoulders rigid, and walked out. Clara watched him go, tears blinding her. That was the last time she saw him. The days that followed were smothered in silence. Her mother wept behind doors. The maids avoided her gaze. Clara stayed in her room, hands folded over her belly, feeling the life inside her grow like a secret the house refused to speak of. She begged for forgiveness, for mercy, for time. But Judge Whitmore didn't believe in redemption, only in consequences. 2 weeks later, she was called into his study. The door creaked closed behind her. He stood by the window, arms clasped behind his back. "You've brought disgrace upon our name," he said. "There is no man who would take you now." Clara looked down. "I've arranged for you to be removed from this house. You will not return." Her breath caught. "Father? Where? Where am I going?" His voice didn't waver. "To the Comanche." Clara stared at him, unsure she had heard correctly. "I've made contact with one of their men. He will take you. It's already agreed." She shook her head, stepping back. "You're giving me away? To them?" "I'm returning shame with shame," he said coldly. "Perhaps they'll make use of you. A child born of sin belongs among heathens." Clara collapsed to her knees. "Please, please don't do this." But he turned his back. The next morning they rode out. The ranch hands averted their eyes. Her mother didn't come to say goodbye. Only one old servant, Maria, dared to press a folded kerchief into Clara's hand as she passed. At the edge of the property, they waited. A man appeared over the ridge, tall, leather-skinned, and silent. A Comanche, dressed in worn buckskins, with sharp eyes that revealed nothing. Her father didn't say a word. He handed the man a pouch, dismounted Clara, and shoved her forward. "Go," he said. Clara looked back once. Her father didn't even watch her leave. The Comanche warrior turned and began walking. Clara followed, her legs shaking beneath her dress, her eyes full of a world that had collapsed in on itself. And as the fence behind her disappeared into the dust, so too did the last pieces of who she thought she was. She had been punished not for disobedience, but for daring to feel. And now, cast away like broken furniture, she would begin again, among strangers, among silence, among the echoes of a love that no longer had a place. But something deep within her, something quiet and unspoken, had not yet been destroyed. And that something would grow, not in defiance, but in survival. The ride was long and wordless. The man who took her said nothing. Not when she stumbled, not when she cried, not even when the sky broke open and rain started to fall in soft, heavy drops. His horse moved slowly through the brush, and Clara followed on foot, her thin shoes soaked through within the hour. The hem of her dress dragged in the mud. The wind was sharp, the kind that found every gap in your clothing and slid under your skin like a knife. She didn't know his name. Her father hadn't spoken it. He hadn't spoken much of anything, just handed her off like a sack of grain and turned his back. She wanted to scream, to run, to claw her way back home, even if it meant crawling across miles of rocks and thorns. But even the idea of home had crumbled. Her home had never been hers. It had belonged to her father, to his pride, to his rules. She had been tolerated like furniture, useful until scratched. So she walked and walked. By evening, they reached the edge of a forest. Pines rose tall like sentinels. The warrior, she still didn't know what else to call him, finally dismounted, tied the reins, and pointed to a patch of dry earth beneath a rocky outcrop. He said nothing, but it was clear. "Sleep here." She obeyed. He started a small fire. She expected him to leave, or maybe sleep elsewhere, but he simply sat nearby, sharpening a blade with methodical strokes. She watched him from the corner of her eye. His face was weathered, unreadable, carved like the hills around them. Not cruel, but cold. Not curious. Simply watching. Clara curled up near the flame, using the thin kerchief Maria had given her as a pillow. Her back ached. Her stomach felt like it held a stone. She pressed a hand to her belly. The child stirred faintly, as if reminding her he was still there, still coming, still hers. She whispered into the dark, "I'm sorry." The next days blurred. They walked for hours, ate little, and spoke not at all. He gave her a strip of dried meat each morning, a handful of berries in the afternoon. Once he handed her a canteen without making eye contact. He never offered comfort, but he didn't mock her tears either. He simply existed beside her, moving through the wilderness like a shadow with purpose. On the fourth day, just after sunset, they reached the ridge above a valley dotted with canvas lodges and smoke rising in thin threads. The wind shifted, and the scent of wood fire and cooked meat touched her nose. She stopped and stared. This was not a village from stories. There were no screams, no war drums, no blood-soaked warriors. Just people, children playing, women washing hides in a stream. Men chopping wood or skinning a deer. Life in its roughest form. The warrior raised a hand, and two younger men approached from below. Words in a tongue she didn't know passed between them. They looked at her, not with hostility, but with detached curiosity, like one might observe a new animal brought to a pen. Then they nodded and moved aside. She descended into the valley with her escort. No one greeted her. No one jeered. Some turned to look, then returned to their work. A small boy with a wooden spear ran past her, laughing. A girl chased him, holding what looked like dried corn. A group of older women sat around a fire, sewing or weaving. One of them glanced at Clara, then said something to the others. They all chuckled. She was led to a lodge near the edge of the camp. It was smaller than the others, slightly weathered, with a worn fur stretched over the entrance. The warrior motioned her forward. She hesitated. He spoke for the first time. His voice was deep, rough like old timber. "Tama." She looked at him, confused. He touched his chest. "Tama." His name. She opened her mouth, but her voice was caught in her throat. She swallowed and forced the words out. "Clara." He nodded once. Then he turned and left. She stepped inside the lodge. It was dark, with the faint smell of ash and tanned leather. A pile of furs lay in the corner. A stone pot sat on a bed of embers. There were tools hanging from pegs, and a small pouch tied with sinew near the door. It wasn't warm or welcoming, but it was shelter. She sank onto the furs. Her legs trembled. Her hands did too. She cried without making a sound, just tears falling silently, soaking into the fabric beneath her. This was not how it was supposed to be. This was not where she was supposed to end up. Not traded, not discarded, not forgotten. But as the days passed, something unexpected happened. No one tried to touch her. No one ordered her about. She wasn't mocked. She wasn't threatened. She was simply ignored, given small tasks. Fetch water, help pound grain, clean tools. She did what she was told, and no more. One morning, a sharp-faced woman with iron-gray braids entered the lodge unannounced. She stood over Clara like a hawk, studying a limp rabbit. "You eat like bird," the woman said in thickly accented English. "You clean like baby." Clara didn't reply. The woman snorted. "You speak? Or tongue fall out?" Clara blinked. I speak." "Good." The woman dropped a bundle of hide in front of her. "So, I don't know how." The woman gave her a look of deep irritation, then sat down beside her and began showing her how to pull the needle, where to stitch, how to fold the edges. Her fingers moved with brutal precision. "Name Seah," the woman said. Clara nodded. "Clara?" "Clara," Seah repeated like it tasted odd in her mouth. "Too soft. Name like feather." "I didn't choose it," Seah grunted. "Feathers still fly." They worked in silence for an hour. Seah left without saying goodbye. The next morning, she returned with another bundle. And so it began. Clara learned to stitch, to grind roots, to sweep ash from a fire properly. She learned the difference between respectful silence and pointed indifference. Some days were harder than others. Her body ached, her belly grew heavier. The stares still came, but softer now, less judgment, more curiosity. She heard words repeated over and over, names of herbs, food, water, hands, sky. She repeated them to herself under her breath, testing them like stones in her mouth. She caught glimpses of Tama. He returned each night, but never spoke more than a few words. He ate alone, slept near the door, left before sunrise. He did not ask about her, did not scold or praise. He was a presence, not a person. One evening, as a chill settled over the camp, Clara was sent to help Seah boil roots for a poultice. As she stirred the pot, a child nearby cried out in pain, burned by the fire. Clara rushed to the girl's side, instinct guiding her hands. She pulled the child away, wrapped her arm in wet cloth, whispered gentle sounds she'd heard once from her mother long ago. The girl calmed. Seah watched from a distance, her eyes narrow but unreadable. Later that night, Seah approached the lodge. "You're not weak," she said, "just broken." Clara didn't argue. "I fix many things," Seah added. "Maybe not you." Clara looked up. "Maybe I fix myself." A pause. Seah grunted. "Feathers learning to fly." The first frost came early that year. Clara's hands cracked from the cold. Her back hurt constantly. She moved slower. The others noticed. Some offered her food without asking. One old woman pressed a blanket into her arms. A young girl giggled and placed a carved wooden bird near her bedroll. And Tama began leaving food by the fire before dawn. A folded pelt when the wind grew harsh. Not words, not comfort, but presence. Again and again. Clara didn't thank him. She didn't know how. But she noticed, and for the first time, she didn't feel invisible. One morning, while reaching to lift a pot, a sharp pain sliced through her belly. She gasped, dropped to her knees. Her hands trembled. It had begun. The child was coming. She tried to stand, but her legs gave out. She crawled toward the lodge opening, screaming for help, but her voice cracked before it reached the trees. Then a shadow moved. Seah. Without a word, she lifted Clara in her arms with surprising strength. The lodge filled with heat, boiling water, cloth, hands. Seah's voice rose like a chant, not loud, but rhythmic. Grounding. Pain took over. Waves and waves of it. Screaming, crying. She thought she might die. She wanted to. Anything to stop the tearing, the fire, the fear. But then, a sound. Small, wet, raw. A cry. Not hers. Clara opened her eyes. Clara was holding something. Someone. A boy. Clara reached out with shaking arms. Seah placed the child against her chest. Warm. Alive. Real. Her son. He blinked up at her with eyes like storm clouds, small fists clenched. Clara sobbed, holding him close, her body wrecked, her heart thundering. Seha sat back on her heels, nodding once. "You strong feather girl," she said. "Stronger than you know?" Clara didn't reply. She just rocked her child gently, whispering promises she hadn't yet learned how to keep. But she would. She had to. The wind outside whispered low through the trees, carrying with it the crisp scent of pine and early snow. The sky had turned a dull pewter gray, and the mountains in the distance were already capped with white. Winter had arrived. And with it, silence settled over the camp like a heavy blanket. Clara sat cross-legged inside the lodge, her back pressed against the fur-padded wall, her son curled against her chest. He was small still, just weeks old, but strong. His tiny fingers gripped her shawl with instinct. She watched the firelight flicker across his cheek and tried to understand how something so soft could exist in a world so sharp. They had named him Neshoba. Seha had suggested it, and Clara had agreed without hesitation. It meant wolf, Seha had said, not just because he came in the cold, but because he had fought to be born in it. Clara's days now blurred between feeding him, rocking him, cleaning, and learning. She had become a fixture in the camp, not embraced, but not avoided either. The curiosity had worn off. Now she was just a woman with a child, no longer a scandal, just another body, another pair of hands. She found herself craving that anonymity more than she had expected. Seha still came each morning, her expression never soft, but her eyes sharp with the kind of approval that didn't need words. She would hand Clara a bundle of work, roots to grind, pelts to mend, and leave without waiting for thanks. Some evenings she would return, sit across the fire, and talk in broken English, mixing her native tongue in between like thread through fabric. Clara listened. Sometimes she answered, sometimes she didn't. But the rhythm was comforting. Tama remained a silent presence. He still lived in the same lodge, though they never shared more than a few words. He would come late, eat little, sleep near the entrance. He barely glanced at the baby, but once, just once, she caught him standing in the doorway, watching Neshoba sleep, his face unreadable. A moment later, he was gone again. One afternoon, Seha brought Clara outside, wrapping her in a thick woven blanket and placing Neshoba in a fur sling against her chest. The cold bit at her cheeks, but the sun had returned briefly, and its light spread gold across the ground. They walked in silence toward the outer ridge of the camp where a group of women were gathering. Clara paused. She felt eyes on her again. Not cruel, not hostile, just measuring. One woman stepped forward. She was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark braids and a scar running down the side of her neck. She looked at Clara, then at the baby. Her gaze lingered. Then, without a word, she handed Clara a bundle of wild onions and pointed to a boiling pot over the fire. Seha gave Clara a small nudge. She moved forward, heart tight in her chest, and began peeling. It was the first time she had been invited to work among them. The conversation flowed around her, words she only half understood, but there were moments where laughter bubbled, where stories were shared in tone, even if not in full meaning. Clara didn't speak, but she listened, and she worked. Later, after the meal had been prepared and eaten, the tall woman, who Clara learned was named Ista, nodded once in her direction. It was the closest thing to welcome she had received since arriving. In the weeks that followed, Clara became more than a guest. She was asked to help more often, trusted to watch children for short periods, given food without having to ask. She learned to skin rabbits, to sew more intricate stitches, to prepare medicine from bark and roots. Her hands became rough, her posture stronger. She no longer flinched when voices rose nearby. She had learned the tone of warning versus the tone of play. Neshoba grew steadily, his eyes wide and curious. He babbled to the fire, to the sky, to the feathers Seha had tied above his bedroll. Clara sang to him, songs she half remembered from her childhood, humming the parts she forgot. She whispered to him in both English and Comanche. He didn't care which one she used. He just wanted her voice. One night, As snow began to fall heavy and slow outside the lodge, Clara sat up late, feeding Neshoba while Tama mended a broken spearhead near the fire. The silence between them was familiar now. Not heavy, not cold, just quiet. The kind of silence people live inside without drowning. After a while, Tama spoke. "He's strong," he said, without looking up. Clara blinked. "Yes, he is, Simon." A pause. "You gave him name." She nodded. "Neshoba." Seha said it meant wolf. Tama gave a single grunt of approval, then returned to his work. That was all. But it was the first full exchange they had shared since her arrival. It stayed with her long after the fire burned low. As winter deepened, sickness swept through the camp. A bitter cough took hold of the children first, then the elders. Fires were kept burning day and night. Seha brewed teas with a pungent smell that filled the lodges and stung the eyes. Clara helped where she could. She carried water, crushed herbs, held sweating hands, and soothed frightened toddlers. Her hands bled from the cold, but she didn't stop. Then Neshoba began coughing. At first, it was small, a rough sound when he lay on his back. Then came the fever, the flush in his cheeks, the heavy breathing. Panic settled in Clara's chest like ice. She clutched him against her and ran to Seha's lodge, breath shaking. The older woman took one look, then barked an order in Comanche. Another woman rushed in. They began preparing a steaming cloth, mixing herbs, laying stones in the fire to press into cloths. Clara sat beside her son all night, pressing his forehead, whispering his name. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, but every breath he took was a battle, and each one made her heart twist tighter. By dawn, his fever had broken. Seha sat beside her, sipping tea. "You strong," she said. "He's stronger." Clara leaned back against the wall, eyes closed, clutching Neshoba close. "I thought I'd lose him." Seha shook her head. "Not yet. He is still wolf." Clara laughed softly, a raw, cracked sound. Spring came late. But when it did, the ground thawed quickly. The river swelled. The air smelled of mud and pine. Birds returned in flocks, their cries sharp and bright. Neshoba was strong now. He crawled with determination, pulling himself up against the lodge walls, giggling at his own success. Clara had begun to laugh again. Not often, but sometimes, at Neshoba's antics, at Seha's dry humor, at the rare moments when Ista told a story and included her name like she belonged in it. She didn't think of her father often. When she did, it was like remembering a wound that had closed over but still ached in the cold. His voice didn't echo as loudly anymore. His rules didn't haunt her steps. She had started to walk freely, to decide when to speak, what to do with her hands, what name to call her son. But even peace has a pulse. One evening, as she gathered berries along the southern ridge, she saw dust rising in the distance. Horsemen, 3 of them. She squinted. The light was low, the sun just beginning to set. She moved closer to the tree line, instincts sharp. The horses drew near. She could make out their clothing now. Not Comanche. Coats, hats, rifles. Her blood turned to ice. She ran back toward the camp, heart hammering, voice stuck in her throat. The riders crested the ridge just as she reached the outer tents. People turned. Thomas stepped forward, hand already on his knife. Clara froze. The lead rider stopped his horse, dismounted slowly, and her world stopped. Judge Whitmore stood before her, older, his beard longer, his coat dusty, but unmistakably him. His eyes locked onto hers. "You're coming home," he said. She couldn't breathe. He looked at the child in her arms. "So, that's the boy." Thomas stepped forward. The air grew sharp with tension. Whitmore raised a hand. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to retrieve what's mine." Clara's lips parted, but no words came. "You've had your punishment," Whitmore said. "It's time to put this behind us. Come home. Be done with this nonsense." No, Clara whispered. He didn't seem to hear her, or didn't care. I'll take the boy too, he's my blood. No, she said again, louder. He looked at her like she was a child refusing supper. Don't be foolish, Clara. You gave me away, she said, voice shaking. You told me I was nothing. You handed me off like cattle. You were a disgrace, he snapped. I was your daughter. He stepped closer. Tama blocked his path. Clara raised her voice. You don't get to call me yours anymore. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. You think these savages will protect you forever? I don't need protection. I needed dignity. And I found it here. The silence that followed was so complete, even the wind seemed to pause. Whitmore looked at her for a long time. Something in his face cracked, but only slightly. You'll regret this, he said. Then he turned, mounted his horse, and rode away. The others followed. Clara stood rooted to the ground, Neshoba clinging to her. Tama watched the riders disappear, then looked at her. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Clara looked down at her son, then back at the camp. This was her home. Not by blood, not by force, but by choice. The camp didn't return to normal right away. Even after the riders disappeared over the ridge, their presence hung over everything like dust that refused to settle. Children played quieter. Men sat closer to their weapons. Fires burned hotter at night, and the elders spoke in low tones while glancing often toward the south. Clara felt it too, the weight, the slow rolling tension in her chest. Even though her father was gone, his shadow remained. She could feel the imprint of his eyes, the scrape of his words. You'll regret this. It echoed in her mind, even when she buried it beneath chores and laughter and firewood. Tama didn't speak of it. No one did. But a watch was kept every night. Riders were sent out in the morning and returned before sundown. The boundaries of the camp became firmer, the comfort a little thinner. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was readiness. The kind born from generations of knowing how quickly peace could turn. Clara didn't ask questions. She simply worked. She ground herbs beside Seha, swept ash from the cook fires, rocked Neshoba through sleepless nights when he teethed and whimpered, soaking her shoulder with tiny tears. She had long since stopped asking herself whether she belonged. She simply was. But the unease changed her rhythm. She walked differently, straighter. She moved like someone who had made a choice and knew she would have to defend it. Not with weapons, but with certainty. It was on the third night after her father's visit that Tama finally spoke to her again. They sat by the fire inside the lodge. Neshoba slept between them, wrapped in a blanket that Clara had stitched herself, lined with soft rabbit fur that Ista had given her. Tama set down the blade he'd been sharpening and said, without looking up, "He won't come again alone." Clara's fingers paused over the small bowl of cornmeal she had been grinding. "I know. He may bring more men next time. Others. Not just your father." She didn't respond at first. She looked down at her son, one hand gently brushing his dark hair from his brow. "I won't let him take us," she said. Tama nodded. That was all. No promises, no grand declarations, just an understanding that had settled in the space between them. Winter receded slowly that year. The snow clung to the shadows of trees well into March. And when the melt came, it brought mud and swollen creeks and the sound of frogs singing at night. The land softened, and the people began to breathe again. The camp held a spring feast once the last of the snow was gone, a celebration of survival. Fires were lit. Food was shared. Children painted their faces with red clay. The elders told stories that made the young laugh, and the old nod with misted eyes. Clara didn't expect to be invited, but when Ista pressed a bowl of sweet stew into her hands and motioned for her to sit beside the other women, she obeyed without question. Neshoba sat on her lap, giggling at the firelight and the rhythmic drumming that had begun on the far side of the circle. It was the first time she allowed herself to feel joy without guilt. Seha sat nearby, her face as stoic as ever, but Clara caught the faintest twitch of a smile at the corner of her mouth. That night, She slept deeper than she had in months. But peace is not a permanent state. It is a visitor, not a resident. And visitors always leave. The warning came with the wind. 2 riders returned late from scouting. Their faces were tight, their clothes dust-covered. One of them, a boy named Towa, walked straight to Tama and whispered something fast and sharp. Tama didn't speak, but his face hardened. Later, Seha came to the lodge and knelt beside Clara. Men, with guns, near river, 6, maybe more. Clara's heart lurched. Your people, Seha added, not unkindly. Not traitors, soldiers maybe. Are they coming here? Clara asked. Seha shrugged. Not yet, but close. That night, Clara sat awake long after Neshoba had fallen asleep. She stared at the fire, her hands wrapped tight around her knees. She thought about the first night she arrived, about how afraid she'd been, how lost, how cold. She wasn't that girl anymore. In the morning, the men met near the edge of the camp. Tama stood in the center, calm and focused, his voice low but certain as he gave orders. Clara watched from a distance, holding Neshoba against her hip. She didn't ask to be included. She knew her place. She wasn't a fighter. She was a mother, a woman. And for now, that was enough. But as the day passed, she found her own way to prepare. She packed a small bundle, just enough food and cloth to travel lightly, not out of fear, but in case the worst came. She cleaned the lodge, ground more herbs for Seha, boiled extra water. It was her own kind of readiness. Tama didn't return that night, nor the next. Clara didn't sleep. Every sound outside the lodge made her stiffen. Every crack of wood, every gust of wind. On the 3rd day, a shout rang out across the ridge. Then silence, then hoofbeats. She rushed outside, heart pounding. Tama rode in first, followed by 2 others. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, and a streak of dried blood ran down one arm, but he sat tall. Behind them was a horse with 2 men slumped across it, white men. One groaned. The other was still. They had not attacked the camp, but they had drawn weapons. Tama had struck first, not with cruelty, with necessity. Clara stood frozen as the camp gathered. The Comanche didn't celebrate. They didn't cheer. They simply moved. The wounded were pulled down, bound, questioned, separated. Clara caught snatches of English from the man who still breathed. We were just scouting, told to look around. Didn't mean trouble. But they had been armed. They had come with intent. That was enough. Tama approached her near sundown. He was tired, his face drawn, but his eyes were steady. He was one of them, your father's men. She didn't need to ask how he knew. I'm sorry, she said. Tama looked at her for a long moment. You are not him. She felt the words settle deep inside her. A slow warmth unfurled in her chest. You are not her anymore either, he added. You are something else now. She nodded. Days passed. The prisoner was kept under watch. He was not harmed, but he was not released. He spoke less with each day. No one knew if more would come, but the camp didn't stop living. Clara didn't stop living. She carried Neshoba on her back while she tended to food, while she fetched water, while she helped Seha treat an old woman with a broken leg. She learned how to set splints, how to track birds, how to read the sky. Her skin darkened in the sun. Her arms grew strong. One night, as she sat outside the lodge, watching the stars rise over the distant hills, Tama sat beside her. He didn't speak. He simply handed her a carved piece of wood. She turned it in her hands. A small figure. A woman with long hair, holding a child. She traced the smooth lines with her thumb, her throat tightening. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded once. After a moment, she looked at him. Will they come again? Maybe. Are you afraid? No. Why? He looked at her, his expression unreadable. Because you are here. She didn't know how to answer. So she leaned against him instead. The wooden carving held gently in her lap, her son breathing softly against her chest. That night, she dreamed not of escape or fear, but of standing on the ridge with a bow in her hand and the wind in her hair. She did not run, she stood. And in her dream, her father called her name. But she didn't answer. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves flashing silver in the early morning light. The sound of birdsong rose over the camp, subtle and steady, like the beginning of something quiet and good. Spring had melted fully into summer. The grass was tall again, and the stream that ran just beyond the northern trail ran fast and cold with mountain water. The world had come back to life. So had Clara. She walked barefoot through the cool grass. Neshoba balanced on her hip, his fingers tangled in the loose fabric of her tunic. He was nearly a year now. His legs were strong and always restless, his voice loud and eager, even if his words were still just sound. He babbled to the sky, to the birds, to her, pointing at everything with wide eyes. He had his father's focus, if only for a moment at a time, and her defiance. She had woven a small crown of wildflowers and placed it on his head that morning. He'd ripped it off almost immediately, laughed, and tried to eat it. She had laughed too. It felt good to laugh without hesitation. Life had changed. But not all at once. After the encounter with her father's men, the camp had remained alert for weeks. Every movement in the trees, every sound on the ridge was a cause for pause. But no more riders came, no more guns, no messages, no warnings. It was as if the world beyond the trees had exhaled and turned its face away. Clara had watched the horizon for days, waiting, dreading, hoping, until one morning she simply stopped. She had risen, washed her hands, fed her son, and gone to work, as she always did, as she always would. Tama had not spoken much since that night beneath the stars, but something between them had changed. There were moments, quiet, subtle things, that lingered longer than before. A hand that brushed hers when passing the fire. Eyes that found hers across the camp and didn't look away. She didn't need him to say anything. His presence was enough. The steadiness of it. The respect. The space. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky in fire, he placed a small stone in her palm. It was smooth, black, with a single red vein running through it. "From the river," he said simply. "Took it from the coldest part." She closed her fingers around it and nodded. That was all. The stone stayed in her pocket from then on, warmed by her hand. A piece of the land she now called home. She had grown stronger over the months, her body lean and capable, her hands quick and certain. She hunted now, small game, rabbits, birds. She taught herself to set traps, how to skin and clean, how to use every part. She learned the songs the women sang when a child was born and the silence they kept when someone passed. Seha remained her guide, her constant. They rarely spoke of the past, but once, while plucking feathers from a pheasant, Seha said, "You carry sorrow well, like a knife on your belt." Clara had smiled faintly. "It stays sharp. Better that than rust." She had begun teaching Neshoba both languages. Simple things. Water, fire, sky. She'd point and say the word in English, then again in Comanche. He repeated both, or tried to. He mixed them often. But he was learning. And he loved learning. There were still moments that caught her off guard, a scent that reminded her of the parlor back home, a flash of white cloth that stirred the memory of her old dresses, a dream where Joshua's face appeared, softer than she remembered, his voice saying things he'd never had time to say. But the past didn't hold her anymore. It walked beside her sometimes, but never in front. As summer deepened, the camp prepared for a journey. They would move north for a time, following the herd, gathering roots and herbs, hunting larger game. It was a tradition older than anyone could recall. Even Seha, who knew more than most, simply said, "The land calls, we listen." Clara had never traveled more than a few miles since arriving. The idea of lifting the camp, of sleeping under new stars, stirred something in her, half fear, half thrill. But she didn't speak of it. She simply packed what she needed. A sling for Neshoba, her carving, the river stone, a pouch of dried meat and herbs, a strip of blue fabric she'd torn long ago from her last dress. They left at dawn. Horses loaded, children quiet, the elders in makeshift carts. The air was crisp and still. Tama rode near the front. Clara walked in the middle, Neshoba at her back, one hand always near his legs. The land changed as they moved. Trees grew thicker, the air cooler, streams clearer. They passed fields of yellow flowers that danced with bees, hills that rolled like the backs of sleeping giants. On the 5th day, they reached a wide plain where the wind never stopped moving. Here they made camp. Fires were built, hides stretched, water fetched from a deep spring that tasted like stone. Clara stood on the ridge that night, the wind pressing her dress to her skin, Neshoba sleeping against her back. Below, the fires flickered like stars. Beyond them, the real stars filled the sky, more than she had ever seen. It was as if the world had cracked open and spilled light. Tama approached quietly, standing beside her. "Beautiful," he said. "Yes," she whispered. After a long silence, he added, "You were not meant for a cage. I was born in one. Then you broke it." She looked at him. He held her gaze. "I didn't do it alone. No one ever does." The days passed easily. Hunting, gathering, swimming in the shallow streams. Neshoba took his first real steps on the edge of the plain, chasing a squirrel and tumbling into the grass. He laughed. Clara cried. Seha called him a clumsy bear and handed him a stick to balance. One afternoon, while weaving a basket, Clara felt a hand brush her shoulder. "Tama." He sat beside her, quiet for a time. "I want to ask you something," he said. She set the basket down. "I want to build another lodge, near the trees. Larger, for winter, for family." She watched him carefully. He didn't look at her. He spoke like a man speaking to the wind, but his hands were still. "For you?" she asked. "For us," he said. Her heart beat hard in her chest, not from fear, but from the echo of something she had thought lost long ago. "I'm not your wife," she said gently. "Not yet." She laughed softly. "You don't say many words, but you say the right ones." He smiled, just barely. "Will you help me build it?" She nodded. "Yes, I will." They worked side by side for days, digging, laying the base, weaving branches for the walls. Neshoba sat nearby, gnawing on sticks, babbling to a beetle. The wind never stopped. It hummed through the grass like a lullaby. At night they lay together, not always touching, but near. Enough. They had not spoken of love. They didn't need to. It was in the work, in the quiet, in the way he watched her without ownership, in the way she reached for him without fear. By the time autumn came, the lodge was complete. Inside was a hearth, a space for Neshoba, shelves for herbs and food. Clara hung the carving Tama had given her above the door. A reminder, a promise. She still thought of her father sometimes, not with hate, with distance, like a chapter in a book she no longer read. She wondered if he lived, if he still thought of her, if he believed she had perished. She let the questions drift like smoke. They did not own her. One morning she stood at the edge of the camp watching Neshoba chase butterflies, his arms flailing, his laugh ringing like bells. Tama approached and stood beside her. "He is strong," he said. "Yes, like his mother." She turned to him, her eyes soft. "Like his father," she said. Tama looked surprised. She smiled. "Not the one who made him, the one who raised him." He bowed his head slightly. "Thank you." They stood in silence, the sun rising behind them. The land stretched wide in every direction, untouched and open. The past lay behind them, small and far away. Before them, only sky. And Clara knew, without doubt, that she had made it, not by escaping, but by staying, not by being saved, but by saving herself. She was no longer the girl who had been given away. She was the woman who had chosen her life. And she would never give it up again. In a land where power once silenced her voice, she found strength in her own steps, love not in possession but in respect, and freedom not in escape, but in becoming. Clara was never meant to belong to anyone. She was meant to belong to herself. And in the heart of the untamed West, that's exactly what she claimed. If stories of strength, survival, and unexpected love in the raw beauty of the frontier speak to your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Love Chronicles. There's more courage, more fire, and more unforgettable journeys waiting just ahead, so saddle up and stay with us.